The LTO Show, the premier podcast for leaders in the LTO tape storage community. Each episode dives deep into the business and technology issues that matter most. The LTO Show keeps you informed and inspired. Be part of the future of storage today.
Welcome to the LTO Show, the premier podcast for leaders in the tape and storage industries. I'm your host, Pete Paisley, and each episode, I'll bring you conversations with industry leaders who are contributing in special ways to the tape storage community. Our goal is to deliver fresh insights into the business case for LTO tape storage. And today, I'm excited to welcome back Nathan Thompson, founder and CEO of Spectralogic. For Nathan, the focus wasn't on growth at all costs. It was about building a legacy. Give every employee, even entry-level workers, stock options. Nathan said it's probably the only time in their life they'll own something like that. Nathan says, treat customers like decade-long partners, not one-time transactions. Stay private, stay focused, and build something that lasts. The result? Spectralogic, a company that remained 100% privately owned for over 4 decades, where employees help share in the success that they help create, and where customer relationships span generations. So as you were being more intimate with customers and choosing your approach to customers well in those days, how did your sales force overcome the challenge of kind of selling a point product at the time, right? You didn't have a lot of the complementary data storage stack and tech stack that an IBM or a storage tech had. How did you compete there? And do you think this challenge led to your development of that complete storage solution that you have today?
Yeah, very much so. Now, we have always had a lot more capabilities built into our libraries, functionality that brings either more robustness or better data integrity for our customers. And so we could almost always differentiate on, here's our competitor's device and it's going to be less expensive. And here is our system, and it's frankly going to be more expensive, but in the end, it's going to save you cost and it's going to protect your data better. And so we have in our larger libraries just a tremendous amount of capabilities that if you write a tape, you can go rescan it every so often and make sure that you're not having any data, getting outside of the error correction span, if you will. And we do amazing things with tapes before customers get them. They all have a born on date built into we write it in. We always write a tape and read it before we will sell it to a customer to make sure that there aren't any dropout areas or damage or whatever. We charge a little bit more for it, but it is, when you're putting as much data on something that, it needs to be very robust. And so, but long term, it's probably the call of the wild or something we came to realize, and this is probably a chapter that we're still writing, although we've done a lot in this. We decided we needed to start solving problems or help customers solve problems, and ideally using tape. You can look at tape, and it's by far the most cost-effective storage. It is, it's probably a quarter to a sixth the cost of spinning disk from a purchase standpoint. It is a much longer lasting technology. It'll last 30 years if in a controlled environment, kind of a room temperature environment. You may not have something that can read it in 30 years, but it takes 1 to 3% of the power of spinning disk. And it really is where data will go. It may not be read or it'll be migrated, but It's the long-term place for data. And there are rumors that the cloud, like the Glacier interface and the cold storage, is on tape, and I tend to believe those rumors. It's so there's a lot more of it out there that's being used at a cloud level. The challenge with this is you can take a tape drive and a tape library, and to build a really viable solution with it, maybe it's come down now with things like Claude AI, but it's a 10 to 15 year process. And we've seen the hyperscalers, when they've looked at that as a media, spend 10 or sometimes 15 years writing the software to manage tape. And so starting in about 2010 or 11, we'd gone from just this one sort of small part of being a tape provided to a relatively larger company, not at the time the size of a Storage Tech or IBM, but we started investing in solving this connectivity problem, and that became our Black Pearl product. And so we've put more R&D into that than any other product in the history of Spectra, and it's by far the most complicated thing. But it allows this tape medium to be used in a broader context. And so we have customers all over the world that are able to use tape in different ways.
Right.
Outside of backup and maybe outside of archive. Sometimes it's used for backup, but so, we have in the media and entertainment space, we have maybe 800 to 1,000 worldwide media and entertainment customers that are using that software. We've built interfaces to some of the media asset managers like Avid and many of the others, but it's a great media and for what they do. They shoot lots of video, they keep some of the video, and they produce content, and they may go back to it. So we've opened it up to a lot more applications than just backup. And so we really see great opportunities for giving, and again, I don't want to say this has been a short-term path, but, you look at so many things, imagine what you could do if you could store 50 petabytes at a quarter of tenth the cost of spinning disk. Imagine what you could do if you could even store 5 petabytes, and across all kinds of industries and markets, there are people who have need for that. And the level of complexity of writing a software to manage tape is such that there's probably only 30 or 40 who've ever done it. And there's a lot more software. I mean, let's take this platform, Riverside. Maybe Riverside, and this isn't a pitch, but Riverside wants to store all of this video they collect. Sure, they can use AWS or Microsoft or such, but it's really expensive.
Sure.
And it's even more expensive when you bring it back. So data is growing. Building a system or building systems that allow customers to store data at a fraction of what it would cost to store in the cloud or on spinning disk. I think there will always be a big market for that.
Agreed. And I'll put in a quick pitch for the LTO show. We have other episodes where we interview Carl Watts with a case study about repatriating 10 petabytes from the cloud back to tape. We have a fantastic session with Tom Coughlin, where he discusses the media and entertainment segment and how the cost of tape is much, much lower for that segment as well. So I'm with you on that, Nathan. Hey, I wanted to ask, going back one more time to say the
Sure.
90s, what were some companies really struggle building an international business, right? There's a lot of aspects to that in terms of your reseller channel, your service and maintenance, et cetera. Tell me how you grew I'm assuming EMEA would have been the primary region, but APAC and perhaps other regions, and some of the experience you had doing
Yes. Really, comes down to finding if you have a market for your product in those. I mean, there's times when I thought, geez, we could go sell more of these in this country, and it doesn't work. But if you have a viable market that can provide a viable margin in terms of both gross margin and enough revenue to make it worthwhile, then it just comes down to finding the right person. Find a leader, find an Australian, find an Indian, find somebody in the Middle East or in the UK or Canada or Mexico, wherever you want to do business, that is the right person that can move that forward. There is complexity that goes above and beyond, but there are markets. Now, there are markets that we have entered and exited. I tell people that, the two best days of my life outside of having my children and maybe my wedding and maybe a few other occasions were the day we got into China. And then the other best day was the day we got out of China about 10 years later. And had we missed that whole experience, we would be better for it. And so there are places it doesn't make sense to be and do business. Right. And it depends on your company. So it's about building the right relationships. And if you do that well and the other ingredients are there, it'll find a way to solve itself.
So it's been published that Spectralogic is 100% privately owned its entire history. Are there times where private equity opportunities to support growth were considered? I'm sure they've knocked on your door a few times.
I would say I get 4 knocks on the door a day. And that sounds egotistical, and I don't mean it. But no CEO I know will actually take one of these cold calls or email solicitations to build a relationship. I've had the luxury of being sufficiently business conservative that I've never had any cash issues. And really, I never say never, but I go back to the early days. Had I taken somebody's money to make an investment in the company, I probably would have failed their expectations and they would have fired me, and for cause. So it's a level of complexity. I have respect for people who can do it well, but and Spectra have been able to completely avoid that. So we've never sold any investment opportunities into the company, but in turn, we're maybe 320 people. I've always strived to give stock and stock options to them. And so I've given away to the employees a very significant stake of the business. Is that worth something? It doesn't pay a dividend. It doesn't, but, someday maybe there will be a relationship that ends up, in a strategic acquisition or something. And those who've worked hard and for so many years with the company will hopefully be rewarded.
Well, I wanted to ask about that too, if you can. You have an employee ownership model. How did you make that decision and how did you go about setting that up?
So I had a mentor, a guy by the name of Terry Johnson, who started at IBM in San Jose when the E3s were made, went to Storage Tech to help them build a disk business, which was sort of successful for a while, and then they exited it in bankruptcy. And then started a company in Longmont, which is a town just north of Boulder, called Miniscribe. And he built a series of 5 1/4-inch disk drives and 3.5-inch disk drives. And it was the first disk drive used in the PCXT. And so I became friends with Terry. He unfortunately died about 12 or 15 years ago in an airplane accident. But he died doing what he loved doing, flying. And I learned a lot from him. And I also had a mentor who his son was in engineering school. He just died about 4 or 5 months ago. And his name is Ken Johnson. He ended up with a newspaper in Grand Junction, Colorado. He sold it and did a lot of things. But, he gave me sort of I'll attribute them both, but I'll say Ken Johnson, really, fund it yourself. Don't go outside if you can. And that lesson stayed with me. And then Terry Johnson was, you need to share this with your employees, even if there's somebody that's, not a high level person, give them 100 options or something. It's probably the only time in their life they'll own something like that. And so I've always done that. And, people leave and their options expire. I think it's a meaningful part of being part of an organization. And in the end, I hope it is a big part of my legacy that treating people right, treating them fairly, and making them part of the equity structure is appreciated. But it's just how I feel. And it's always served me well, with just a few exceptions, but very rare exceptions compared to all the people that it's been great with.
Spectralogic has a reputation within the industry of family, and I'm sure that is supported by your efforts there to include them in the upside of the business, so to speak. So I do hope as well that is a significant component of your legacy. Being in the Boulder area, you probably hired a lot of storage tech folks over the years, and maybe from some of the other. It's always been a hotbed for data storage in general, but particularly tape.
Yes. And it's because IBM had I didn't start this thinking there's a bunch of tape talent around here. I just looked at the opportunities, and there's probably more disk stuff around here. A little bit of flash, like for flash controllers, but I don't think that's very significant anymore. And it was where IBM had their tape plant, and that's what spun off to be Storage Tech. And it always seemed to me like a pretty interesting business. And it's when we were getting into the tape library business, there were 30 companies that tried to do it at the same time, and just probably perseverance is all that got us through it. But now there's 3 or 4. And it's a niche. I'm good with niches. It's not trying to build other things that are volume oriented as much. I mean, there is a fair amount of volume, and so it's just kind of picking what battle you want to stay in and be in.
So let's move on to kind of the tape storage business in general for a little bit. How do you feel about the current state of the tape storage ecosystem, right? Because the number of players has narrowed a bit over the years. Only IBM manufactures the drive themselves. Quantum got out of the business many years ago. HP got out of the business a little while ago. Storage Tech, and then you've got, as you mentioned, 3 or maybe 4, depending on how you look at it, tape automation manufacturers, and you've got 2 media manufacturers. What do you think are the positives, pros and cons around the ecosystem today and going forward?
Sure. Well, at this time, it's a growth industry again. And so the number of cartridges, LTO, is going up that are being sold. That some portion of that relates to the hyperscalers, but it's also, just overall, there seems to be a pretty good climate right now. And, I think that it won't get back to 40 million cartridges a year, but I think it can probably grow a reasonable amount from here. And some of this is due to the fact that the disk drive manufacturers went through a very, very difficult time 3 or 4 years ago with their largest customers, which were the cloud companies. And so this stat is probably not perfect, but Seagate went from $12 billion a year within a year to about $7 billion in revenue. And that's because the cloud purchasers, had enough, didn't grow as much as they expected, and most of that volume went to zero and for several years. Now it's back. They're taking a lot. Some of this is related to AI, and they're doing well, but seemingly there is a discipline of almost dying from the experience of almost dying by the disk drive manufacturers that are preventing them, at least for the time being, from going and building more factories and increasing the volume a lot. And so if you look at their earnings, they're killing it. There aren't enough disk drives at the moment or disk capacity. And so it's going up in cost. We have a very good relationship with Toshiba, and so they've just been great to work with. But I don't know that it's as good for everybody else. When I say the companies using other suppliers have complained about a lot of the difficulty. But the world is coming around to what could we use instead of that. And so we are seeing a lot more interest in tape, but it's tape as a repository, not tape as a backup target. So I'm not saying it's as strong for all of the tape library manufacturers, but I know it's pretty strong for us, and I know it's pretty strong for IBM at this point. And I, some of the things we see are very encouraging, and it, the world continues to need data storage, and it continues to grow, and some of it's in the cloud, and that's appropriate, and some of it is in on-prem, and there's probably going to be a lot in the kind of MSP colo space. And so at the moment, we're relatively bullish. And so the cartridge counts are going up. As far as we know, we can tell that the two suppliers are doing pretty well. The two media suppliers, they have large capital, large amount of capital deployed in their manufacturing lines and in their technology development. But I'm happy to see that they're doing well. LTO 10 looks really strong. And we are selling a lot of it and have a lot of interest in it. And so IBM doesn't break out their numbers, but the sense I get is they're doing very well. And so, right now it's good.
And
right now probably the last several years.
Yeah, and they seem pretty committed to ongoing investment in the LTO technology as well, based on conversations I've had with them.
Oh my gosh, did they make an investment to get to LTO 10?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of capital, it's really the first drive after, the full height LTO 10 is the first total redesign of the drive since LTO 1. And the technology they brought to bear in that, the investment in semiconductors and mechanisms and everything is extraordinary.
Word has it that the half-height delay for LTO 10 is due to similar investments that are ongoing right now just to roll out the half-height version. So I view that as encouraging news for the format.
Yes, and I believe those formats will take us through LTO 14 or 15.
Well, I was going to ask, it's important to remember that they demonstrated a 580 terabytes, I believe it was, a few years ago with Fujifilm. So the roadmap is pretty legitimate. If you look at that, the technology's there. It's just a matter of how they deploy it.
Well, and it shouldn't be underestimated how much technology work they have to do generation to generation. We have to a question or comment you made earlier. We've picked up people from storage tech. We have people from IBM. We have people that work for Quantum. We have HPE people that were all in the tape business at either in a really big way or part of it. And the guy that John Benson, who's with us, who used to run all the tape business for storage tech, he knows the technology very well. And he says you have to get a 3.5 dB improvement in signal to noise every time you double the capacity. And it takes 4 or 5 big things, including better media, smaller media particles, to get that doubling. And so these investments between generations aren't just doubling the clock rate for the recording. There's a lot that has to go in. But to your point, the potential is probably can double 4 or 5 more times what goes on a tape cartridge in coming years. And we'll see how these energy assisted like Hammer and the like, they've had a lot of work on them. They're actually working now, but I do see the continued demand at the tape industry, and primarily led by IBM in this, and the media guys that are doing the real technology work down at the recording level. They can continue to do well. They have to keep investing, but as long as they're harvesting, they can continue to invest.
Well, Nathan, I certainly want to talk more about technology with you on some future sessions we do, given the opportunity, and particularly about Spectralogic technology developments. But I had a couple other questions before we close.
Sure.
One is,
Yeah.
You wrote a book a few years ago called Society's Genome, and
Yes,
I haven't read it all yet, I must admit. I just ran across it when I was prepping, but I found it very interesting. What was the purpose behind the book that you and Spectralogic published, and what was the core message you were trying to send?
Well, if you look at how until maybe 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, all forward improvement was encoded in DNA. It survival of the fittest, of the blade of grass or the mollusk or whatever continued to improve, and that's what that's the genome. The genomes continued to, and do to this day. Not sure at the human level, but and I don't want to imply any religious thing or otherwise there, but humanity, starting about 1,200 years ago, started recording information that became more and more essential for the survival of humanity. And my gosh, we have 7.5 billion people around the world. A lot of that depends on being able to continue to move that technology forward to feed and support and water that size of a population. And that population, given its size, is always going to have problems with viruses and other organisms that want to feed on us, probably is what that comes down to. And that continuity depends on data storage. How do you make plastics? How do you drill oil? How do you build semiconductors? And so it's switched from being the genome of the organism. I mean, now we modify the genomes of organisms to our ability to store information and technology know-how. And I have a great example of Ptolemy's map of Europe, which was lost for 500 or 800 years. And a whole new set of maps were recreated. And then somebody found in Istanbul or somewhere else the Ptolemy's map, and it matched what was from the 4th century or 3rd century AD to the more modern map. But that was lost for 600 or 800 years. And that's somewhat driven our strategies for how we store data and how we move data forward.
So I just found this of note personally. You were inducted into the Boulder Hall of Fame a few years ago. That must have been a kick.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
You go along and sometimes people recognize you for entrepreneurship or whatever. And I think it was the Boulder Business Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And I don't know about the Hall of Fame in Boulder. That I probably don't qualify for that one, but But in any event, yeah, that was nice. It's good as a leader of a company or that our company gets recognized for things. And, it isn't, I'm a small part of it when you have a lot of people, and I love it when they get recognized and Spectra as a company gets recognized for things. So I want to give them their due attention. I've had plenty in my life.
And Nathan, I wanted to ask too, when you're not working or doing interviews on a Saturday with Pete Paisley from the LTO Show, what are some of your passions that you like to pursue?
Well, I would say thank you for the interview, but I'm still very attuned to leadership and management, and so I pay a lot of attention, build relationships. Like I've got a very good friend who was a destroyer captain and came up through the Navy, then went to work for Ball Aerospace, and then did leadership at the university. I think if you're working, you have to always be sharpening your saw.
Yes.
I've been part of an organization called YPO, which is Young Presidents Organization. Now, I was thrown out for age-related violations when I turned 50, but there's a bolder chapter of it. And somehow, for the moment, in a moment of weakness, probably, they tolerate older members. And so I get so much out of that, and I enjoy it. I'm crazy about airplanes and flying and aviation. I love geopolitics. I mean, I could read about, a lot of interesting things going on. And I'm not trying to pick any side. I mean, I think it's important in my role, especially as my company, that I'm non-political. I am very interested in cellular simulation. And this has to, I believe we're approaching a point. If I ever had a lot of money and wanted to fund something, I would fund building tools or steps towards being able to simulate simple organisms that have DNA, such that later on we can maybe simulate an entire cell, a human cell, and be able to treat, odd disorders, cancers, et cetera, that computationally, through computational simulation. I just think the Google AlphaFold is just one of the most interesting contributions. You can describe a protein, but the way it folds was so unpredictable until Google solved that. And a couple of their people who solved that got Nobel Prizes. I don't expect any recognition if I ever get my Carcinella Rudi simulation to go anywhere. Love reading like you. I love skiing. You get to a certain age, it's all about health and fitness. And yes. I love design and architecture. So that's a few.
Well, Nathan, I just want to thank you. I appreciate all the work you've done for the industry over the years. Thanks for supporting and participating in the LTO show today. And I do hope we can get together again soon to talk a little bit more about technology stuff. If you're building a business, take a page from Nathan's playbook. Stay independent if you can. Share the upside with the people who create it. And remember that the best legacy isn't measured in exit multiples. It's measured in the lives you've impacted and the industry you've helped preserve. We also had an encouraging conversation with Nathan about the tape storage industry itself. Nathan is bullish on the future, with LTO 10 representing IBM's first total redesign since LTO 1, with cartridge counts growing again, and the hyperscalers quietly deploying tape at massive scale. The technology that many wrote off years ago, it's experiencing a renaissance. Stay tuned and subscribe to the LTO show wherever you get your podcasts. We'll have Nathan back on a future episode to discuss technology leadership at Spectralogic.
You've been watching the LTO show. Thanks for joining us. The LTO show is produced and written by Pete Paisley. Thanks to our sponsors, these guys and these other guys. Don't miss our next episode coming soon. We feature feature industry leaders in data archiving that supports LTO storage.